I've noticed as a neurodivergent that I've really struggled with public speaking. And from an early age, I was always very self conscious that I wasn't saying or doing the wrong thing socially because it could incur rejection. And I had multiple experiences in which I said something that was ill timed, insensitive, rude, blunt, socially inappropriate, didn't really connect with what everybody was talking about, and I got an adverse reaction. And those adverse reactions trained me to be very self-conscious about what I said and did, and not to step out of line and to be weird, and you know, which would inevitably lead to rejection and not having friends. And so ever since then, I've noticed that I'm kind of averse to speaking out in public situations. Of course, now where I am in my life, I'm not there, but for most of my adulthood, there was some degree of discomfort around that. I noticed that when I spoke, I often spoke really fast, which could be my ADHD. I could mumble a lot, and I didn't articulate very well what I was saying. So a lot of people would ask me to repeat what I said. And I would try to keep it short and clipped because I guess subconsciously, if I kept my communication muted and small, there was less chance of me saying something and getting into trouble. Unfortunately, that meant I had a whole nother array of problems, which is that people didn't always understand me. And I didn't project confidence. And projecting confidence is really important in social situations because people can read you as unconfident and therefore unlikable. And then you can be rejected on that basis, judged, excluded, or even bullied or targeted by people who aren't very nice. And they're looking for people who are less than secure or self-confident to pick on. And for a long time, I think that's been a challenge. And I think it's the self-consciousness that makes it hard to publicly speak. But there's also this trend I've noticed where the pace of my thoughts and my brain often outpaces the pace of my actual speaking. So I'm rushing to get everything out of my mouth, but it's kind of like there's a disconnect between what's going on in my brain and what's coming out of my mouth. So I'll stumble over, I'll use the wrong words. It's kind of like when you try to off the cuff say an idiom, and then I end up, swapping out idioms and saying the wrong thing. Like, it's a piece of cake. I once said it's a cup of tea, is what I said to a friend, and their primary language wasn't English, so they learned the wrong idiom from me, and they repeated it to me later, and I was like, oops, I taught you the wrong idiom because I got them mismatched. The wrong word will come out, and sometimes with comedic effect, and sometimes with offensive effect, where it was a totally inappropriate word. And I've noticed that my brain can formulate the sentences, but when it comes to translating it, there's this disconnect, and it can lead to a lot of awkward situations when the wrong thing is said, and then you become very self-conscious. And I get very frustrated with that because in situations where I feel pretty confident and I know that I can express myself well and coherently, I suddenly can't. And I don't know how that appears socially. Of course, I'm self-conscious about that to some extent because I'm wanting to come across as a coherent individual, and there's a real risk that I'm not coherent and that I'm saying something that is jumbled and doesn't make sense. And I decided, at some point that I didn't want to stay like that forever. And I took public speaking classes. I did improv to kind of decrease my anxiety and increase my self-confidence. And I found that by recording these videos for my channel and just repeated practice, and watching the videos back and listening to my articulation, I could improve that so that I could articulate sentences, improve my pacing, improve my intonation, because these things didn't come second nature to me as somebody who's autistic and ADHD. I found that a lot of those things, it didn't sound like, let's say, neurotypicals. I didn't communicate in a style that they felt comfortable in. Not that we should try to people please them and change our ways, but I knew to be successful that I had to kind of traverse both worlds, be able to speak in my autistic ADHD style, like I do freely and openly in these videos, but also be able to articulate myself in a way that conveyed confidence and was also understandable by people who are neurotypical. So it's a balancing act, but through practice, I was able to improve my articulation, improve all those mechanical aspects. But I still find that my mouth misfires, and like my brain will be cueing things that it wants to say, and then things will get lost in translation or come out all wrong. I don't know if there's a fix for that. One thing that I tend to focus on is scripting a lot of my long form videos and then reading the script, because that way I know that what I'm going to say is articulated and it's concise, and I'm not going off on tangents, and I'm not being overly tedious or rambling. And not to say that there isn't a place for that kind of communication, just it isn't my preference. I like to be concise, and that's probably from my background working as a journalist. But I noticed that with practice as well, I am improving my ability to spontaneously off the cuff speak, and for it to not come out in jumbled sentences. But you can see that I'm also still stumbling when I speak and I'm noticing that I speak relatively fast, and that's part of the problem, I think, is that my mouth wants to divulge everything that's going on in my head because the pace of thinking is so fast and there's a million thoughts coming all at once. But my ability to vocalize can't keep pace again with the rate at which I'm thinking things or wanting to communicate things. And part of that is also with ADHD, you will tend to forget something if you don't say it, and then you have like a lot of ideation going on. Your brain is jumping from like there's a mental map of different ideas that it's linking up to and wanting to connect them all and wanting to get to this thing and get to that thing, which can lead to rambling and tangents. So there's all these things that I want to talk about, and then spontaneously I'll be mid-conversation and this other point arises, and I know that I have to get it out before I forget because my short-term memory is not the greatest as an ADHDer. Have you struggled with interpersonal communication, self-confidence in social situations? Have you struggled with this misfiring of the mouth issue where things don't come out clearly or you jumble your words? Have you also struggled with articulation, intonation, all those kinds of things that are kind of expected in neurotypical society? I would love to hear from you.